I don't know if you're aware, but Jason Borer has entered the meeting.
Yeah,
There we go. Here I am.
that's my dad.
Yay!
Yay. Hi.
Hello. It's
Oh,
awesome to see your place. I haven't seen it since you've really got it well decorated.
oh, yeah, I have a couple jewelry. That's my bathroom you see right there.
Very nice.
The
Let me,
infamous bathroom.
I'm in, baby. Jason, you weren't here yet, but there was a moment um where my headphones disconnected from the Zoom call and just started playing Johnny Cash's Hurt for
Just
no
really.
apparent reason. There's no other device
Really?
that my headphones connect to. It wasn't playing
Uh-huh.
on my phone or my computer. I have no idea where it came from.
Really?
I have no clue.
That's
I have no
weird.
clue.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was somebody in your apartment trying, that somehow accidentally connected or something.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but
We've
like
talked about that, but I feel like it's more likely divine intervention.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
for Johnny Cash's Hurt, that's one that
Yep.
God would be like, okay, you got to stop what you're doing. You got to listen to this.
Yep. Just listen to this. It's
He's like,
been a
have you heard
while.
this noise?
It's been
Yeah.
a while. I'm trying to decide. Let me check my settings. I don't know which device settings we're using. Um,
Hi.
Hi, Heidi.
whether we're using um, my mic on my earbuds or my mic um, from the iPad.
Well, you sound very clear, whatever it is.
Do I? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing then,
Okay. Good plan.
because that'll if it's good, no use to mess with it.
So true. And I've always said that.
Hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome back to Women in STEM. Today we have our
Wait, what's the name of it?
Women in STEM, and every week we change the meaning of the acronym to be something different,
Well,
depending on what we're
that's
talking
great
about.
for search engine optimization to have your title be Women in STEM.
Exactly. We're like,
Exactly.
how many people are going to be searching this, looking for something else, but then they end up finding something
Yeah.
even better.
Yes.
Oh, that's what's happening. I just figured out my speakers.
Oh, nice.
Oh.
So,
There we go.
what does
Um,
STEM stand for?
this week, some weeks are better than others. I'll say that. And some weeks we have a hard time coming up with an acronym. And so this week it is sequels, technology, engineering, math.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, within that, it's sequels and prequels, both. So what we kind of have a list of like prequels that we wanted to talk about, so I'll just read those out real quick. Rogue One, Solo, Revenge of the Sith, are all the Star Wars
You
ones.
did it again.
Oh dang it! Hobbit and Monsters University, and I'm gonna watch this. Jurassic World, Toy Story 2, Incredibles 2, Shrek 2, Puss in Boots 2, and Mad Max Fury Road are the ones that we thought about. What happened last time, Dad, was I started at the top, which is where I put my favorites, and then I went to the bottom, which is where I put the worst ones. And then by the time I got to the bottom, I was really sad. So just start from the bottom up to like,
Yep.
got to keep the energy.
Just like a lot of
Yep.
rappers do, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. Start from the bottom up.
Start at the bottom, now we're here.
So we would like to open the floor up to you at this time.
I know you've been preparing, so if there's anything that isn't on our list that you want to talk about.
Well, I think for one on your list, probably the biggest one that is missing is the Matrix. So
really
Oh.
thought about that one because I know that's a really like big opinion that a lot of people have, but I've only ever seen the first Matrix, and I've never seen any of the sequels, so I didn't know enough about it to feel comfortable including it.
Yeah,
We take this
yeah,
very seriously, you understand?
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, you can't be talking about movies and opining when you don't have not seen them.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
And
but
I've
yeah,
always
that's
said
probably
that.
the only one. Yep, good. No, that's probably I think that probably covers, I think you got the best ones out there for the most important conversations and topics.
Mhm. That's what we thought.
Because, so here's my theory is that this was my thought that I've been preparing for is that sequels and prequels, there's two different types. There's sequels and prequels that are basically world building and building out the world that is introduced in a movie. And there are sequels and prequels that are dependent upon a story that is just too long to tell in one movie. And the best sequels or prequels are ones where that is basically seamless, where you can't tell which type of sequel it is. So
That a lot. And I like the like having the distinction, but it doesn't necessarily put one over the other. Because like
right,
I can think of Rogue One that is a little bit of both, you know, it's dependent upon the
yes,
story of what happened in episode 4, but also you get a little bit more of this world and characters that we've never seen before, just enough of hints of characters that we know, but mostly
yep,
it's exploring a new element.
yep,
And then you have something like Bahubali, which is very
It's
much
just
dependent
too
upon
much material to fit into
it's
one movie. So
too
it
right,
is very,
yep,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, you need like it wouldn't work as just one movie. You need to break it up into
yep.
two. But neither one is better necessarily than the other. You can do both very, very well, and
Mhm.
you can also do
And
both very, very poorly.
like that one is similar to uh, the Lord of the Rings,
Right.
especially versus the Hobbit, where the story is too big, but the world building is consistent from one to the next. And it's clear they're operating in the same world with the same rules um, in both of those movies. And
Hmm.
The Hobbit is clearly in a different world, even just visually, than the Lord of the Rings, despite the fact that it shouldn't be. The world building is very different, and the character development is different. And in particular, the technical engagement with from the director, the production is all very different as well, which is another one of those things that is less important, but it still influences how quality the sequel or prequel is.
Hmm. That's definitely true. Yeah, you see, like a lot of and this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with like it being a sequel on its own, but a lot of what makes the Lord of the Rings movies feel so real is the practical effects, the amount of like
Yeah,
dedication, the makeup,
Mhm.
Olivia, you've told me about the guy who makes the plastic chain link.
Yeah, like there are a couple of people whose entire job it was to make the chainmail.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like for months, probably they sat there and made plastic chainmail for everyone on set. And like that puts you really in that world that feels so intricate and so real versus The Hobbit, where so much of it was CGI, where you
yeah,
have these technical advancements, but it makes it feel like you said, like it's a very different world. Like that
yeah,
doesn't feel like the Lord of the Rings world. I'm not actually there.
right,
These characters don't all have,
yep,
all the extras don't have this armor and the
yep,
lived in feel that the Lord of the Rings had, and that
yep,
Right.
is one
exactly,
of the reasons why it's lesser.
And it's so
right,
interesting that like if somebody's getting started on reading the books, usually like people will read The Hobbit even if they don't end up reading the rest of the series. But it's totally opposite with the movies where you're like, oh, you don't really need to watch The Hobbit. Like you
Yeah.
can just watch the main trilogy, right? Which is like it's very backwards and it's I think not what was intended. Like obviously the world building in The Hobbit, the book, is so strong that it usually sets people up really nicely to understand the Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
yep, yep,
Yeah, that's part of the disappointing thing is that it a little bit of what we had talked about before is that sequels have the opportunity to build on a previous story, but also have the opportunity to be able to stand on their own.
Yeah.
And it feels like The Hobbit in particular was trying so hard to stand on its own that it disregarded everything that preceded it in terms of quality, in terms of like story. You know, The Lord of the Rings was such a quality story because it was so well thought out, because J.R. Tolkien is such a talented author and world builder that every detail was accounted for. But with The Hobbit, Peter Jackson decided, he's like, oh, well, we don't need to follow what J.R. Tolkien did. We'll just throw in this like random character to pursue them throughout the whole thing, even though that's not the point of The
Right, it's like
Hobbit.
a
The Hobbit
completely
is an
different story
unexpected
now.
journey. It's just him. They're kind of like meandering their way to the Lonely Mountain, and that's their goal. That's their eventual destination. We don't need to have an antagonist.
Right.
We have one. It's the dragon. It's Smaug.
Right.
We don't need another one. What are you doing? And like have all this drama with like Thorin and the like backstory of the Auric. Like, who cares? No one cares. That's not what we're here for. He already has a driving force.
Right.
Like, you're removing what makes the source material so powerful. And this kind of goes back to our conversation about adaptations as well. Like, you're removing what the author intended, but also what makes the story powerful in the first place. Changing is not necessarily always a bad thing, but it depends on what you're changing and why.
Right, because you get to the point where you're just making a new story. So there's no reason to give it the title and characters of this other thing when it's clearly just its own thing now.
Yeah, and I think that Peter Jackson was trying to take what was successful about Lord of the Rings with that antagonist. He was almost trying to make it too similar to the Lord of the Rings, like by having a single bad guy that ultimately would have to be defeated in battle or something like that. But just didn't have confidence in the story, I guess is a good way to say it.
And it's just too thin. It didn't need to be three hour-long movies. You could have fit it into one 3-hour movie. I would have even, it could,
because that's how the books are, right? Like, it's supposed to be, it's 3 long books and like one book of The Hobbit. So you might as well just make one movie of The Hobbit.
Well, and that's interesting.
Maybe a sequel if like.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Never thought of it this way, but it's really common for movies that are super successful unexpectedly. Then it's kind of like a money grab, and you just make a sequel just because you can make money at it. And so there's some sequels that fail because they're just nothing there but money. And The Hobbit is that in kind of in reverse, which is they started out with a vision that was just too big, and it was about making money, and they should have done the reverse and just said, instead of making this into 3 movies, let's just stick with one.
Right.
And they should have changed it even after the first one. And they should have changed their plan when they saw the reaction to the first one. But I don't know, they might have filmed them all at the same time.
They did. That's the sucky thing, is they filmed all of it. They filmed over the course of like 2.5 years or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, it's unfortunate because you've already invested. So there's no going back.
Yeah.
What can you do? Well, let's talk about a successful sequel. Mad Max Fury Road. One of the movies of all time.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the sequels.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I would definitely say it's one of the best sequels ever.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. Like, just as a standalone film, it works beautifully. And I think that's what really drives the strength of having a sequel is, can you watch it without like necessarily needing to watch the first one to appreciate it? Like, watching the first one strengthens your enjoyment of it, sure, but like, you don't need to see all the Mad Max movies in order to understand Fury Road. In fact, it doesn't help.
Right.
You have more questions than answers. But that's part of the experience, is you're like, I have no idea what's going on. This is such a foreign world to me, but like, it's explained with such confidence, and like,
they're very true to the world itself. Even if you don't have context, they're not going to spell everything out for you. It's just a lot of, it's verisimilitude. They trust themselves to build the world the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. And you can see the consistency in the world building from all the movies is still, despite 40 years or whatever it's been, the consistency in the world building is still there. So because they held the consistency of the world building same, all they needed was a great story that didn't undermine what they'd done before and added to that world building. And yeah, it turned out exactly the way it should have, and it was one of the best sequels ever.
Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite films. Like it's visually stunning. And George Miller, he's a freak, but he knows like practical effects. I think some crazy percentage, like 95% of that movie was just practical effects and like 5% was CGI. And every time George was like, okay, no, we can do this in post, all of the stunt people on set were like, well, no, let's give it a try. Let's see what we can do. And so like even things that George Miller was like, this is too crazy to try, they were like, no, we're gonna do it. We're gonna make it look cool. So the world feels it feels dirty and gritty and like Dad, you and I have talked about this, but it feels very scavenged.
Yeah.
Like Furios's gas pedal is one of those foot measuring
Yep.
things, and it
Yeah.
has like a lock that she can press
Yeah.
down and clasp so that the gas is still like she's still pressing the gas pedal, but
Yeah.
she can like go out the window and shoot at somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
So
feels
that tells you
very
when she did that, you're not thinking, how does that even work? You could say, no,
yeah.
it's been done before. That's something they clearly have practiced, they've needed to do. And, you know, it's something that they thought about beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah.
The characters thought about it beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very it makes sense in context and like from the plot of the story. Like it's fun to see a set that doesn't feel pristine. It
Mm-hmm.
feels kind of cobbled together, and that's intentional. That's how like A New Hope felt as well, and that's because
Yeah.
George Lucas didn't have like a lot of funds when he was making the movie. He didn't have the vision to make it exactly what he wanted to, but that led into how the story felt. Right? Is like, yeah, he's on a desert planet. It feels dirty and worn down.
Right. Like it
That
feels like
fits.
he has to make stuff out of the leftovers of what everybody else had, and like it feels very homemade, but in a very like real and palpable way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also helps that people who made that film were very into it, and they're like, no, we should try, we should figure out how to make it practically as much as we can. It's like that's what we like about a lot of Star Wars. It's what we like a lot about Lord of the Rings. It's like the same thing with like Fury Road, that it's like not only did they succeed in what they were doing and it's really fun to look at, but you can tell that everybody who was working on it like really wanted to be there and wanted to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah. And it's something that, you know, I think people recognize with sequels, a lot of times it is just a money grab. And sometimes like, well, does that matter? But you can really tell the difference in those movies when people are bought into it and they're doing it because they care about it. It does matter. It does show up in the quality of the movie. And it's, you know, you wouldn't think that, but it does.
Yeah, that's something I've said. Oh, a friend said this to me a couple months ago, and I think about it like literally all the time. But he said like the passion bleeds through, right? Like everything you do, whether it's you know like schoolwork or your job or talking about movies or making movies, if you have passion for the project, it bleeds through. It does, like it shows, and that's something like talking about like Puss in Boots too. I know you haven't seen it, Dad, but oh, wait, real quick. There was one thing I wanted to talk about Mad Max too, real quick. Just going back to like the idea that you don't necessarily need to see the previous movies. Like throughout the movie, Max has these like visions of ghosts, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen all the previous Mad Max movies. I've seen a couple of them, but I don't know all those characters. But even if you didn't know that he was like, it's a perfect way to describe he's haunted by visions of his past. You don't necessarily need to know who these people are in order to know they're people that he's lost, whether it was his fault or not, or like just through inaction. These are people that have died because of him, and that's something that like follows him around, and that's like a really really easy way to communicate that to the audience, while like like you said, Olivia, like trusting them to understand that without having to explicitly have him sit down and like describe that to someone else.
Yeah.
He's
These
a
are the
very,
people that I see in my visions. Like it doesn't matter.
yeah,
It's just another element of like this world is real, right? And
yeah.
this everybody here has a past, whether or not you as an audience member get to see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and before you get to Puss in Boots too, um, it's interesting that so many years had passed between Fury Road and Thunderdome.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, we're also still very close to Top Gun Maverick. And almost
And
everything about that movie is different from Fury Road, where it has a different director. Um, and it's very much tied to the first story. It does stand on its own, but it's a lot better if you've seen the first one because it does build upon it. What's interesting is in Fury Road, it's been 30 years since the last Mad Max movie, but the movie itself doesn't reflect that, doesn't matter. Whereas
mm-hmm.
in Maverick, it very much has the same amount of time has passed. So everybody in the movie is older, and they do such a great job of incorporating that into the real world, into the movie, that it makes it feel more real as well. And I think that's another element of making the sequel is how do you change if your movie reflected a certain part of the world at the time, um, that's part of the world building, and you move that world building into the future in a way that is believable with the audience, and Maverick did that. So it's just interesting that they figured out a way to account for all the actors being older, but the story and the world is still just as engaging today as the Top Gun was when it first came out, which is pretty hard to do.
Mm-hmm. And they had like they were able to incorporate the actor's real world experience, like Val Kilmer's voice.
Yeah. Yep.
Again, just makes it
Yeah.
engaging for the audience to say like, oh yeah, no, I understand.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point of like being able to, because it would be weird if it was like all those same people like trying to be their younger selves.
Right.
Like
And
they're just
pretending
it
like
would come
nothing has
off
changed.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes more sense to have
Like
have them all have
perhaps
changed. Like perhaps.
like perhaps, and I don't want to name any names here. I can't think of anything off the top of my head necessarily, but like
But like
perhaps
what if there
something
was
set
like
in a
some sort of
galaxy far, far away.
I was gonna say, what if there's some sort of character who like he's like an archaeology professor, but he also
Right.
he also goes on adventures and he
It's
has to
interesting.
just
We're both on Harrison Ford though.
yeah. Yeah. Like let him age, let him just be a different
Right.
guy now instead of having to
Right.
be the same like young hero
Right.
that he was 40 years ago.
Right.
Well, and Dad, because I know you were going to talk about Blade Runner. I haven't seen either of them, but talk about the third Harrison Ford role.
Yeah. And
While we're on the
that one
subject.
again probably ranks in there with some of the greatest sequels of all time. And the Harrison Ford character does a great job in there. He is like it is all believable again. And again, that's probably in that category of movies that you don't have to see the first Blade Runner to enjoy it. You might learn a little bit more, you might enjoy it a little bit more, but they did such a good job with Harrison Ford in the sequel. They didn't screw it up. They knew who he was, and they played to that, and they wouldn't have had to, because they could have de-aged him, or they could have put him back into the exact same scenarios, based on the lore of the world, but they didn't try and do that. They really built into his character development, and so they did a great job. Which again, that sequel um, is one of the better ones of all time.
That's on integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
The
you
aging
think
never
of
looks perfect.
no,
Yeah. And it
No.
always
It's
just comes off, like, at least for me, I always have kind of like a weird feeling seeing somebody on screen who I know wasn't there
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah. Whether
like
that's
uncanny valley a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the uncanny valley when they're de-aging people. Is that really because our eyeballs see it different, or is it because we know that they did that? We know that, yeah, Harrison Ford is old and they just filmed this like 2 years ago. So that can't be him.
Right.
That's what I don't know. But this is just a quick point, because I saw somebody interviewed Antonio Banderas about Zorro. And they did Zorro, then they did the sequel, and then they asked him, and this was just fairly recent, if there was ever going to be a third. And he just said, yeah, but this time I would obviously have to be the mentor character, the Anthony Hopkins character. Like, oh yeah, well, that is showing awareness of how the real world works. Like, he's not going to just go back into action.
Yeah, he's like 60 years
And
old.
yeah, so if, he'd at least recognize that a sequel couldn't be just him as Zorro going around with his sword.
Mm-hmm. Like a very real sense of awareness,
Right. Yeah.
self-reflection, knowing.
Yeah.
Like, hell yeah, I could step into
Yeah.
that like mental role, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would not be the main character again.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, maybe he just like doesn't want to have to be Zorro. Like at a certain point you
Right.
get tired of having to play the same character over and over.
Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
maybe more rewarding for him to have to put on a new hat, and
Yeah.
instead of having to just do the same thing that he's already done.
Yeah.
Like just watch
Exactly.
Zorro again.
I think Zorro
Yeah.
lost his hat.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, he does. Speaking of Tony Banderas,
Mhm.
how about this?
there you go.
Seamless transition to Puss in
Wow.
Boots, call in the last wish.
Like I said, Dad, I know you haven't seen this movie. And I don't recommend watching the first one. I have a memory of watching the first one. I don't know why. I don't feel like I would have chosen
Yeah.
to.
I haven't seen the
But
first one either, but I really don't think you need to see the second one. It's again like it's
no.
just very it stands for itself, and there's enough like hinting back at what happened before that you can figure out what happened before without having to watch it.
Mhm. And like it references to the SCU, the Shrek Cinematic Universe.
Mhm.
But and in the words of my good friend Fisher Alexander, Alexander is a YouTuber that we both really like, and he
He
did
has
a
like
video essay about
60
this.
subscribers. I was like his 12th subscriber or something. Like he's very unknown.
He's
We just talk
small.
about him as if we're pals.
We love his stuff. We watch him obsessively. But he really liked Puss in Boots, Call in the Last Wish, and he did a very positive review of it. And one of the things that he mentioned was that it pays homage to the Shrek movies and references Puss's role in those movies without feeling limited by it. Like it has an entirely unique style of animation, which is really fun to see the difference from the first one to this one, that it says, oh, okay, I'm not limited by what I've done before. Let's just
Yeah.
see what we can do that's new and fresh. And it's visually, it's a
It's
beautiful
awesome.
film.
Yeah, it looks so
Stunning.
cool.
It's the colors, the textures, they change the frame rates depending on whether it's an action scene or not.
Mhm.
And it's beautiful. It really is a very, very well done film that is, appropriate for kids. It's meant for kids,
Yeah.
but that I think any adult would be able to sit down and be very pleasantly surprised by like,
But
oh
the
my gosh,
quality of the
that was
work.
good.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to the passion behind the project.
Yeah.
Obviously, the animators, the writers, the storytellers, especially Tony, he has been playing this role forever, but he
Our
was like,
good dear
what if
personal friend Tony Banderas.
Tony, if you're listening, shout out to you, my friend. But he's not exhausted by this character. You could tell that even him, the 60-year-old man, was like, oh, we're making a new one. Oh, it's this story. Okay, I'm gonna give my whole heart and soul into voicing this cat again, and I'm gonna make it meaningful. Like every single person involved in the project had so much passion for it, and it's really, really, really well done.
And there'd have to be somebody there, because my cynical view would be Puss in Boots 1 was just a simple cash grab, and the Shrek
Yes,
cinematic universe got pretty low quality.
you are
And
correct.
Yeah,
and at
I'd say
some
so.
point, somebody saw Puss in Boots and said, I think I could do something with those characters if I had a better story. And they came across a better story, and because they cared about it, they got people together who cared about it, and Antonio Banderas must care about it, and that's probably why it succeeds. It's not because the story needed to go on. It's just they had a great story to tell, and those characters were fun, and so they built that story around it. Like I said, I haven't seen it, but that's what I that's probably my theory, in talking, listening to you describe it.
No, I think you're right, because I think I do think the first one doesn't have as much oomph behind it. Probably for that reason. Probably because they were like, oh, Shrek, whatever, he's got a cat friend. Let's make a movie about the cat friend, you know?
Yeah.
And it was just like whatever. But yeah, it was very refreshing to see this just as a sequel, first of all, but just as a movie in general.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't.
And it's interesting that there's kind of two different ways that a movie could like not really warrant having a sequel. And the first way is if it's like really, really good, like one of our other examples was The Incredibles. Like the first movie is so perfect on its own, and it has a sequel which is like fine, but it would have been fine with or without
Yeah.
it because it's such a great movie. But then on the other hand, like if you watched the first Puss in Boots, you'd be like, this doesn't need a sequel because it's like not very interesting or
Not good.
engaging. But then the sequel like really outdoes itself. So you feel like, oh, there is actually more to this story that we
Yeah.
didn't realize before because it just wasn't very like maybe well thought out in the first one.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'd like to hear more about how the second one got built, because I think what you're saying is absolutely right.
Well, and it's weird because there is a large chunk of time between the first and this one as well, like 10 years
Mhm.
at least.
Yeah,
I
like
think.
Yeah.
it was surprising for people to hear that there was another Puss in Boots. They're like, didn't we already do that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
Yeah. That's what I thought.
the
I
sequel to a
thought it was,
spin-off movie.
yeah,
yeah.
I thought it was like a straight to DVD thing. Like that's what I thought. Or
Mhm.
as the kids are saying, straight to streaming.
Yeah.
Or
Would make more
just
sense.
streaming. That's what
Yeah,
the
because
hip
if it
kids are
went to straight to DVD, even fewer people would see it.
Yes.
Like
saying.
nobody would
Yeah.
watch it. Like, oh, that's weird that they
Mm.
made another one and on DVD. Like,
Oh,
it's been a
yeah.
decade. Get out of making
Might as well
things
just
on DVD.
fax the movie over.
Yeah. Might as well
Oh.
just paint it onto a cave wall and use tricks of the light to watch the movie.
Oh.
Yeah. I think going back to The Incredibles too, I think that's that kind of cash grab idea. It might have had a place, but also Brad Bird, the director of the original, said that he didn't want to do a sequel unless he had a good enough idea for it.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the problem as well, because after 10, 15 years of, nostalgia and loving the movie for being an incredible film, it really is.
Yeah.
There's no matter the quality of story, there's nothing you could do that would even match the significance of the first one, let
Yeah.
alone surpass it. No matter how good
Right.
of a story you think you've come up with, the legend has built itself into something bigger than maybe it actually was.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if this
Even
is
if it does
another.
deserve the hype, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's another problem of like having such time in between, but then not accounting for it, right? Like how it would be weird to see Tom Cruise be the same character as he
Yeah.
was in Top Gun, right? Like if we know that 15 years have passed since the first movie, maybe we could let a few years pass for the characters, right? Like maybe Jack is
Yeah.
an older kid or something like this. And then there's
I think you're
a
onto
different
something there.
story there instead of just telling like, what if it was The Incredibles but with Elastigirl as the main character? Like I think that's a good starting point, but what if it was later on?
Yeah. I
Right.
think
It picked up
that's
right
probably
after the first one.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's probably a pretty critical flaw that you've caught on to, because it works for The Simpsons, where they're all the same age and they never age.
Hmm.
But that's kind of the shtick of The Simpsons. But how do you? It's just, yeah, I think that's probably a big part of the failure of that second Incredibles movie is just they didn't account for any of that. So a failure of world building and storytelling.
Right, because if they're not changing through aging, they're static. They're not changing at all.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
clearly, what else is there to learn about these characters that we didn't know already? Nothing is the answer.
Right,
Like
right. Because you're still seeing them in the exact same point where we left off. The
in
same
the
age,
same,
like they've just figured out the same things about themselves. Like they just moved to the new house, and then
Yeah.
here we are.
yeah,
Instead of like it could have been at like even 5 years later, right? And that'd be enough time to see like, oh, these people have had to change.
Yeah.
right. So like it's the
Yeah.
same characters that I love, but now I get to like relearn them
Hmm.
Yeah.
instead of just copy paste. I don't even remember Violet being in the second one.
Yeah, she's in it. She like has a date with Tony or whatever, and then she
Oh,
has
that's right.
to
But they
like
erase his
she
mind.
misses
Oh
it
yeah.
and whatever. Yeah, yeah.
So like, yeah, we have to go through her learning how to have confidence and like maintain that in
And
herself
Yeah.
again.
Even though she just
We've done
did.
that.
Yeah. And there's
Yeah.
like I remember there's a lot of people liked the scene where like he's trying to do homework with the kids and he's like, why would they change math? And that could still
Mhm.
work, but what if he's just doing math like with Jack Jack or something? He's in first grade and he's like, why
And
would
he's
they
like,
change
what?
first grade math? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is my 6-year-old child. Why
Yeah.
am I confused?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things that could still hold up, but it just I think it
Right.
fell short in trying to be the exact same movie.
yeah.
Like, and like you're saying, instead of Missing Incredible still could be like the main character, but like what if their roles were reversed later down the
Yeah.
road? Like what if he's the house husband now? He's
Right.
really mostly in charge of raising the kids while she's kind of
Mhm.
the main, like, sure, anything. But I think that's a really good point that, you know, they didn't take into account
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
time had passed. Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Well, I have
Do you
to
guys have
leave
any other?
pretty soon, but I don't want to like cut off the conversation if there's anything else you wanted to say.
I will end with my comments on The Matrix because best
Yeah.
example that I can think of a movie that didn't need a sequel or a prequel because of every reason out there, but it's both an example of in-universe problems in the sequel and story problems in the sequels, where there was no good stories and the universe, the rules that existed within the universe in the Matrix no longer applied in the sequels, where he was the one, he solved the problem, and according to the rules that they laid out, that should have been it. So they had to go back and try and retcon all of this stuff. And every time they would retcon one thing, it would set another tripwire. So that's why I would say that's one of the movies that just complete failure on every level for its sequel. Which now you guys will have to watch it.
Yeah.
I just
Sure.
watched The Matrix for the first time a couple months ago. I loved it.
Oh yeah, I
very,
watched
very
it.
Sometimes-
I watched it on the plane coming back from Europe a few months ago as well. So
yeah, it's awesome.
Cool.
it's good.
That's one. Sometimes I watch old movies and I'm like, why does this get the hype that it gets? And then sometimes, like with The Matrix, I watch it. I'm like, yeah, all right, I get it.
Like I get it.
Yeah. First 15 minutes changed movie making, and it even showed up in the first Shrek. So just funny how
it did.
Yeah.
how much it influenced the world. So good.
Yeah, and it deserved it. The director's
Yeah,
phenomenal.
absolutely.
They've done.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dad. This was very fun to
that
have
was
you.
fun. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, if you would ever want to be invited back, talk to our managers. We'll.
I will.
Whitney's my manager and I'm Whitney's manager. So yeah.
Oh, awesome.
We get into a feedback loop. We never get anything done.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's kind of a disaster. No, you've been the most prepared guest that we've had on the show.
Good.
Yeah.
I think that it went really well.
Good. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
fun. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you so
for the
much for
invite.
joining.
Of course, yeah.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
We'll see you guys.
Bye, guys.
See ya.
Love
Bye.
you both.
Love you.